Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. ACSAFE is absolutely thrilled to be hosting this showcase of CallTime mental health training and resources. I see you are all filing in, and that's great. Before our exceptional speakers begin their presentation, I will be taking us through some housekeeping notes and sharing a little information about ACSAFE. So this webinar is a total of 90 minutes. We'll have a 60-minute presentation followed by a 30-minute question and answer period. All participants will be muted. We ask that you submit your questions to the presenters using the question and answer function. If you have any requests for the presenters to clarify what they're speaking to in the moment, please post your comments using the chat function. This webinar does not have the capacity to share personal situations and to answer questions to specific personal scenarios or personal experiences. A recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, and you will also receive an email notification when it is available to rewatch or to share with others. So about ACSAFE. ACSAFE Safety Association is a not-for-profit health and safety association supporting British Columbia's arts and entertainment industries. Since 1998, we have been serving our industries by providing resources and training to employers, workers, and supervisors to achieve a healthy and safe workplace. We are always here to provide information relevant to best practices around health and safety in the arts and entertainment industries in BC. So ACSAFE's vision is for British Columbia to have the safest and healthiest arts and entertainment workplaces in the world. Our mission is to prevent and eliminate workplace injury, illness, and death by providing world-class occupational health and safety well-being programs to the employers, supervisors, and workers in the BC arts and entertainment industry. Our core values are safety, education, accessibility, collaboration, and innovation. Now for our presenters, our speakers. So first off, I have Greg Taylor. Greg is a registered clinical counselor and certified human resources professional and is a leader in the workplace mental health and wellness field. FSEAP, the mental health service company Greg leads, is a leading provider of employee and member assistance programs within the motion picture sector. His specializations include psychological health and safety in the workplace, wellness programs, and evidence-based positive psychology practices that contribute to healthy and effective workplaces. Greg is a mental health advisor and content development lead for the CallTime campaign. Next up, we have Christina Kasperchek. Christina is the current chair of the CallTime Mental Health Society and was a founding member of the CallTime campaign representing IATSE 669. Christina has a personal passion and heart for the mental health and well-being of her friends and colleagues in the motion picture sector, having herself worked her way through film's competitive ranks from camera trainee to camera operator. She's been extremely active in the film community for over 31 years, including serving on the executive board of IATSE 669 for 27 years. So for today's webinar, our learning objectives are for participants to conclude this session being able to locate resources and features of the CallTime campaign, including their website, training, blogs, podcasts, and champions program, to determine mental health and addictions resources available through the British Columbia motion picture industry unions and guilds, to increase awareness of how uncertainty and stressful work and life events can affect our mental health, and finally, to describe mental health models, including the Mental Health Continuum, to consider the state of your mental well-being and that of others around you. So for our agenda, we'll be looking at reviewing, of course, CallTime mental health itself, and then we'll explore concepts such as mental health models. We'll look at some practical tips on lending a helping hand to others, and then we'll finally end with our question and answer period. And just in case, we do want to acknowledge that some content may be emotionally triggering for participants. Your emotional responses are normal, and your vulnerability is appreciated for this learning experience. But we do encourage everyone to please remember to take care of yourself. If this content does become triggering for you, you are reminded that you can step away from the technology you're using to view this webinar until you are ready to come back, or you can leave the webinar entirely and view the recording at another time. If you become triggered but choose to stay for the duration of the webinar, then please don't forget to practice self-care once you've finished this afternoon. And without further ado, I will pass the mic to our lovely speakers.
Thank you, Dagan. It's great to be here. So glad to be able to participate in this session today. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And for the start of the session today, it'll be myself and a conversation with Christina, as she's the chair of the CallTime Mental Health Committee and Society. And so we wanted to start today because some people are familiar with our campaign, others may have heard of it, others this is new. So we just wanted to give a little bit of history so that you know more about this campaign. And as I've been working and advising with the committee and with the campaign, the one thing I'm so moved by and impressed by is that this wasn't a campaign that was created by some group for the sector. This was actually a campaign created by the sector for themselves and for their colleagues, coming out of volunteers and a group that formed out of the unions. And so, Christina, why don't we talk a little bit about that, the history of CallTime, and I know you were involved right from the earliest days of the first groups that got together, and maybe sharing a little bit about that time and also your motivation for being involved.
Yes, thank you, Greg, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Well, it really was a catalyst by two gentlemen named Laurie Ward from Teamsters 155 and Tom Adair from 891 in the spring of 2017, that they had an idea that and knew that the community wanted to come together collectively to make a difference. The groups that ended up forming that came together were UBCP ACTRA, the Teamsters 155, ICG 669, IATSE 891, and ACFC. We wanted to come together because we real desire to help those affected by mental health and substance abuse issues. And I think too, what I've noticed at being part of this, there is truly a lot of heart involved. Yes, it's personal, and I believe it's personal for all of us, whether you know someone or perhaps yourself, and you're trying to navigate, or you see somebody that needs to navigate through these circumstances. So the society is now an official society. In 2021, we became a society. It's really exciting for me and the others to see how much information through blogs and podcasts and reaching out to one another on Sept because of being stimulated by the website and the information. And it really, really is making a difference that need help.
Yeah, and just as we're talking today, we can go through just a few of the resources that we've developed. Of course, as you were mentioning, so this is a shot of the menu when you click on the menu on the main site. So this is a portion of the homepage that you'll see here. If you click on menu, then it'll take you to the main menu that gives you the options. And we have kind of the history under the about of the campaign. We also have a section on the union benefits because the unions contributed to this, and members didn't always know what was available to them, in particularly related to their mental health and mental health supports. So we wanted to find a way to have those housed all in one spot, so that if you didn't remember the benefits plan web address or whatever to look up your benefits, that you knew you could go to CallTime and get those. And a learning center with some information for both peers and leaders, our resources, and as you've mentioned, our blog and our contact information. So here's just an example of the page, and then there's links through to each of the 6 unions that now are participating in this campaign. And I think it might be worth noting, Christina, just about the contributions made by the unions.
Yes, everybody is putting in the equal financial contribution and time. Every month we have a meeting. Then with Greg's help, we have a team that helps us put together content, which of course is checked through Greg's expertise to make sure we are saying and doing the right things at the right time. And again, I think what's really amazing about this, there's no politics involved. There's no political agenda. The goal is the same for everyone. We just want our colleagues, our friends and family to do better and have options at how to get there. And I think that's really important.
Exactly. That's what I've really appreciated about this campaign, is that, you know, it's so heartfelt by the members of the unions that have volunteered to be part of this on behalf of their unions. Then there's been the approval of funds being contributed by the unions, and the collaboration with the health plans as well, because quite often there's trustees over health benefit trusts for each of the unions overseeing their benefits, and they've participated, of course, in sharing the information about their plans. And so it's really been a collaborative effort between the unions and then each of the representatives that actually sit on the committee. One of the things, of course, that was a priority was some training for the sector on how to support people in the sector with their mental health. And so when you navigate to the Learning Center on the website, you'll see that there's a couple curriculum in there. One is Mental Health for Leaders, that talks about how leaders can actually use anti-stigma language, recognize mental health issues in the workplace, how to lead some sensitive conversations when they want to support somebody, creating a supportive workplace, and how to provide support. And then also one that's more for individuals, meaning peer-to-peer support that anybody can use. And just talking about one step at a time in terms of our own mental health and supporting other people, how to lend a helping hand. And we'll talk a bit about that today, but there's fuller information there in the module, how to lead a conversation, looking at mental health resources that are available. And so those are all kind of key components and modules within those that you can read easily and access online. And then we've also, over time, accumulated resource links to outside resources on a whole variety of topics. And so you can see the resource list here, and everything from First Nations and Indigenous supports to sleep fatigue to alcohol substance, suicide prevention. And there'll be links both for people who are looking for help for themselves and also links for others who may be looking to support others. And we also have an industry section that links to some other supporters and other programs. And then a section on personal finances, which can be a major stressor for people in the sector as they have possibly variable employment. And in particular, during the recording of this webinar, the strikes that have been impacting the level of work available in the local market here and the local sector.
I think something that's important too with the resources and the blog posts and all the information coming out, we're really aware of, or try to be really aware of, what is going around within the industry, within, you know, our environments, that we can tailor some of the information to what is going on around us, so that people can, as Greg mentioned, the example of the financial information when many people are being affected by what's going on around them. So yeah, we really try to be aware of what's happening when we create these resources and blog posts.
Yeah, thank you. We can see here in this, even the sample list of blog posts, you know, how they've been kind of tracking seasons and issues. We have the second one listed there is navigating uncertainty, managing anxiety during times of labor disruption, which we've written particularly during this time of challenge in the sector. And recognize, number one, recognizing people who go unseen. That was in recognition of Overdose Awareness Day, and talks about not only those who have lost their lives, but those they've left behind. We also have talked about alcohol use. We've talked about, you know, during the summer, the positive effects of being out in nature, coping with uncertainty. And one that we wrote last season, but will be very relevant for this season, is Rise and Shine, how sunlight combats fatigue, or other methods. We have a couple posts related to what to do during winter months, including the use of satellites and various other methods to be able to still keep our mood up, even as the rainy season starts to hit. We've also got a champions program that the committee was, you know, adamant about. How do we get more people engaged? So it's not just a small group of people supporting this campaign, but how more and more people throughout the sector. So Christina, you remember the conversation about getting the word out. And so one way we've done that is the committee coming up with the idea of a champions for the campaign. And so there's actually a page on the site and a blog post about this where you can actually join a list of champions, or you'll be on our direct email list to be able to receive the latest updates on new blog posts, podcasts, other information that's being added to the campaign and website, for you to then be able to share it out on your social media or to the people on set that you're working with around you. So if you'd like to be tuned into the latest content that's being developed by CallTime, then please contact us through the website or find this page here, the Champions page on the website. And again, the website, if we haven't made it clear, is calltimementalhealth.com, calltimementalhealth.com. And then the latest fun we've been having in delivering content is by the new CallTime Mental Health podcast. So far, we've launched 3 different episodes. I think these were the 2 that had launched by the time we prepared the deck. I think there's one more that just launched and is just being launched. And so the first episode was CallTime It Gets Better. That was with Alexis from DGCBC. She's also one of the founding members of the committee and has also been through her own mental health struggles, as of many of us who are involved with the campaign. And so she shares a bit about her story and the story of others that she sees around her in the sector. So a great way to kind of feel that you're being heard by the campaign as she talks about that. The second episode is on personal finances when times are tight, which is generally for everybody in today's economy, but also there are those in the sector that are struggling, particularly now as work has slowed down. And then our third episode is with ACF. And ACF, of course, is a national group that provides support to film and entertainment. They have many programs, financial and otherwise, for supporting members of the sector. And their website, afchelps.ca. But they're also the next guest on the podcast. And so you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. And so we're easy to find, and you can subscribe to our channel and to the feed, and you'll be updated when the next podcast comes live. And our next show will be on Aboriginal and Indigenous mental health, but not just for that target group, also them sharing how we can all apply First Nations and grounded healing techniques for our own selves. We'll also be in the future talking to ActSafe and also collaborating with them on what a healthy set or a healthy workplace can look like. So please stay tuned to that. So Christina, just any other kind of reflections just as I get going on some of this other content?
Well, I think it's also important to know, though, the catalyst was to collectively help the film community navigate through those issues. This is not just for people working on set. This is something that we appreciate when it's shared with family members and friends and other organizations, because there's a lot of content here that addresses and can help people regardless of what organization you even belong to an organization. So I just wanted to make it clear that everybody has access to this information, and the more people viewing it, the better the chances are that we'll get into that world of us feeling healthy and making positive life choices. So yeah,
thank you. Thank you for that. And that is a good reminder, because although I did feature a page that does talk about sector union benefit plans, the plan was always to have resources for everybody. So those are there if you are eligible under a health plan within one of the union groups, so that you can access the information that's particular to mental health and addiction support through your benefits. But also that's why the open resource section is for absolutely anybody who's looking for links to additional resources to help them or a family member. So for sure, anybody within the arts, entertainment, and film sectors can use these benefits, as well as family members or anybody else from the public. Although some of the content, of course, and the way we word some of the content is particular so that you can hear yourself in the content as you work in the film and motion picture sector. Okay, so we thought we'd take some time today, not just to talk about the campaign itself and the website, but that we would also kind of move into a conversation on mental health frameworks and what's happening. So Christina, thank you for kind of those introductions and your thoughts, and we're going to have you back on the webinar again later during our Q&A. So if people have questions about CallTime or the union's involvement or kind of how it came about and the content, Dagan and Christina and I will be hosting a Q&A just after a section here where I'll talk about some mental health models. So first of all, we're in a complex world. And so I love this photo of this tree in the field with the steady winds. And it feels like it's been this kind of situation for the last number of years. We had, of course, COVID, the pandemic, workplace shutdowns. Then we had workplaces open, but with all the restrictions, masking and mandates. And it feels like we were somewhat getting out of that period and starting to normalize. And now there's been, as of this filming, some union action that's meant that there's been reduced work. And so, you know, whether it's work-related stresses or personal and family-related stresses, you know, life can have steady challenges that come at us. And so our question of our mental health is about acknowledging it and recognizing where we are in our mental health, because each of us throughout our lives are going to fluctuate on terms of how well or unwell we are related to our mental health, just the same as with our health. With our health, we're on a spectrum of health. And at the higher end, there's going to be cold, flu, minor illnesses. But we also may have periods of life where we have more critical issues that have to be treated and addressed before we move back into a healthier state again. And sometimes we end up with chronic health conditions or chronic pain. That means it's something that never quite goes away, but we're monitoring it and we're finding ways to maintain ourselves and maintain our health as best we can throughout our lifespan. And so when we think about what is mental health, instead of just mental illness, mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. And so really that's people's ideal state: resilience, working with the challenges that are coming from life, being able to contribute to their family, their community, to their workplace. So this is the ideal, but we all know that we do hit those headwinds, right? We do hit those challenges. And so a lot of it is about recognizing when our mental health is being challenged, and then being able to take some steps to be able to proactively protect and support our mental health. The current disruptions, previous disruptions like the pandemic, current disruptions like the union actions in the States, I mean, they all have an impact on us. And it means that many of us may, first of all, be kicked into survival mode, right? So when this news hit or as work start to decline, then survival mode is about, well, what's going to happen now? What am I going to do about income, gathering information and resources, kind of relearning how am I going to do what I do? What are my alternatives that I can do while there's a work slowdown? And also feeling a bit disconnected from others and also maybe from your own self. There also may be a level of grief, feeling sad and not knowing why. There may be just general less productivity and motivation as kind of the stress of the unknown of the situation can become overwhelming, or not wanting to accept that this may be the new normal for a little while. And also your stress levels may be higher. You may be feeling more anxious or angry at the situation. Your emotions may be on a roller coaster where you're relieved to have a bit of a break, but then you start to think about your next bill or rent or finances, and it triggers stress again. And you may feel more irritable or snappy just because things aren't in a normal state. Mental health during a crisis, one of the terms, kind of acronyms I like to work is Saga, and it stands for surge capacity, ambiguous grief, growth, growing cognitive load, and attention disruption. And so those are three things that we can find when people are under crisis or under stress. Surge capacity is just when too much information is coming at you, when you're listening to the news and you're hearing reports from your union and you're getting information about projects you may have been working on, and then trying to figure out what resources there are to support you. So surge capacity is just TMI, a bit too much information being processed at once, and that can wear us down in terms of our energy and our focus. Ambiguous grief means nothing's ended permanently, but maybe I got pulled off a show that was in the middle of filming, or I was about to go back to a production, but it was halted because of the strike. And so that means I may have these feelings of grief, meaning I'm missing being in my workplace, I'm missing contributing, I'm missing my colleagues that I would normally be together with at this time. There can also be growing cognitive load, just as you try to figure out how to make it through this period. So just that extra brain power. And then also attention disruption, where it's easy for us to become distracted and not have a lot of time or take a lot of time for our own self-care, because we feel urgency that we should be checking things out, talking to people, watching the news, hearing for the latest update, because that feels more important than sitting down and meditating or taking a deep breath. So those are all kinds of signs that we can do to kind of think about, how am I doing right now? Am I suffering from this surge, this grief, the load, and the attention disruption? And it doesn't mean that those won't be there, but can we be mindful of them and say, okay, where am I taking a break from these things? How am I creating some space? And so I've kind of described these before getting to these, but with surge capacity, nervous systems, are built to handle short-term stress, little surges of stress, but the ongoing few months long stress can be very kind of debilitating. With our grief, it's easier to grieve something that we can see or is more identified, but it's harder to build up or to identify the kind of little micro losses when we're not on a project or possibly not at work. And with cognitive load, again, we have a routine. So our daily routine, although it may be busy, is automatic, and it takes less effort to be able to walk through those. When we have to figure out what new to do each day, it can take an extra strain. And the disruption, as I mentioned, can take us away from taking a deep breath and kind of having some downtime. And so also along the way, the three things that contribute to resiliency and mental health, people may feel their experience of community has been diminished a bit. Interpersonal connection, because you may not have as automatic a connection to people when you're not in a workplace or on a project. And also there's the sense that we're not making the same contribution, because if you're like me, part of my value, part of my self-esteem inevitably does come from feeling like, am I making a difference? Am I adding something? And when we're off work or limited in terms of our activities in some way, sometimes that can have an impact of how we're feeling about ourselves. And so when we're thinking about our own selves and when we're thinking about others, even if all of that is going on, we try to put our best foot forward, right? We want to look strong for our kids or for our families. We want to support others that are around us in the sector. And so we don't want to burden them with how we're feeling ourselves. And so it's easy for us to be having a mental health strain or a mental health challenge or a more serious issue, but nobody know it. And people would say, well, you don't look sick. And so we could be hiding all kinds of things behind that kind of our face of strength. And so that's why I like this kind of diagram that looks at the iceberg model, the idea that when you see an iceberg, typically only 5 to 10% of the iceberg is actually sticking out of the water. The bigger part, and sometimes the more dangerous part, is underneath the surface of the water. And so it can be the same when we think about it as an analogy for how people are doing in their mental health, our own or others, is that when we see somebody who's struggling, here it says struggling employee, it could be a colleague, it could be a leader, it could be somebody in your family. What you see is people looking like maybe they're overtired. Maybe people have withdrawn or become more quiet. Maybe they seem more distracted or less focused. Maybe they're not following up on their responsibilities the same way that they were, or they may be having kind of unusual emotional outbursts or a swinging mood and swings in their mood. And all of those are kind of the outward symptom of what may be going on underneath. So what you may not see are the workplace issues. So people in your family and your life may not know as much about how your work has been particularly affected. I have a lot of people who know I support the film sector, and people say, oh, well, you know, we're in Canada, isn't everything still going okay? Right? And you may have people in your life that are assuming that, when really we're down to like 20% of the work that would normally be happening. You know, it could be other strains from your work that you do and the people you work with. It could be health issues, insomnia, or challenges with our nutrition, or chronic illnesses, or a mental health disorder of depression or anxiety or other. And we may have other life issues, you know, things that are just happening outside of all of this, like our relationships and marriages, our personal stress, financial or legal other problems, or other chronic issues that could include addiction that may be flared up, or worse, because we have less distraction and less structure in our life right now during slower times. And so we can think about ourselves. How am I presenting to the world, and how much am I hiding under the waterline? And thinking about people around you. You know, what may you be seeing on the surface that may indicate that there's something else going on underneath? One way to kind of think about this measure of how we're doing in our mental health is the idea of the mental health continuum. And so you can kind of see it on this green, yellow, red to orange to red scale. So on the one side, you can think about mental health in that definition, where we have normal fluctuations in our mood, kind of day by day, which is totally normal. But we also have normal sleep patterns. You know, if we're physically feeling okay and with energy, we perform okay, we're active. When we start to come under strain in our mental health, because some of these other factors we just talked about, you know, maybe we're more nervous or irritable, or we feel some sadness coming on. Maybe our sleep is being disrupted, or we can't get certain problems that we have in our life out of our mind. We may end up with tired or low energy. And also our bodies can reflect our mood as well, because mood can be affected by the chemicals that our brains are processing and producing in our body. And so sometimes we'll feel it in terms of aches and pains. We also may just be putting off projects or talking to people by procrastinating or isolating a bit and connecting less in our social activity. If things become stronger, either an event happens that's much stronger, or we start to have things accumulate, that's when we can start to feel injured, in that our mental health is being harmed. And so when that is happening from our life circumstances or our own physical health, then we may actually start to feel more severe anxiety, anger. We may have more pervasive sadness. Our sleep will be much more disturbed, or we may all feel fatigue and more physical aches and pains. We won't be able to focus on our work in the same way, and we'll want to possibly withdraw even more than before. And then if there's a significant issue, or we've developed other patterns of health or possible chemical imbalances within our brains and our bodies, then we can end up with a mental illness, or on the ill side. And this is where, just like with physical health, where you may be healthy, having a bit of flu, cold, something that's more acute and serious, to something more chronic, this is where you may feel much more excessive depression or anxiety. You may not be able to sleep at all. You may have severe exhaustion, or unable to perform or keep up your day-to-day activities. So these are all the warning signs, kind of the temperature takers along this continuum. What I thought would be helpful, though, is beyond just identifying that, to say, you know, what would be possibly some of the things that we could take as actions when we're in each of these stages. When we're in the healthy stage, some people think, well, I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to push full bore on my life activities. And this is where we can often end up with burnout, where things are good, but we overtax ourselves. So to stay healthy, in the healthy range, we need to focus on the tasks at hand, the things that we can control and can manage in the midst of even change, breaking our bigger problems into kind of manageable chunks, identifying ongoing nurturing and support, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. So this means having people we can talk to about the challenges of our day, being able to eat healthily and have some physical activity that they've proven helps sustain our mental health as well. When we're into reacting, that's kind of a little bit of a warning sign that we need to start recognizing our limits. And my experience with people is that when they get to the yellow zone, they actually try to work harder just to push through, instead of taking any margin of time to kind of just have some kindness and compassion on themselves to say, hey, I'm starting to feel something coming on. Maybe I should just take a bit of a break this morning, or maybe I'll do one less thing this day so that I can get a bit of a breather. And it's making sure you're getting the right rest and food. It's getting your extra coping, identify minimizing stressors. Some people at this point, and we'll talk a bit about it, might get some coaching or other support, external support, just to say, yeah, I'm not quite feeling myself. As it progresses, though, if you're feeling worse than that, you might want to identify what are the distresses happening in my life, and maybe getting some help and talking to somebody, seeking help, and whether socially or more formally. And then if you realize, okay, I am not coping, things have kind of gotten out of hand, out of my control, then you really need to seek out help urgently to be able to provide you with some outside resources and support. And so stepping from these kind of broader actions, the things that you can actually access during each of these stages, when you're healthy, your EAP, your EFAP or member assistance program, if you're a member of a union, is one option, because they provide not only mental health services, but also nutrition counseling, health coaching, financial consultation, just other stuff that helps keep you well and engaged in your life. There's also lots of other community centers that have lots of low cost or free courses, meditation, other kinds of fitness courses. You can buy a limited number of tickets to the local community center gym. There's all of these things that you could do. You can do a lot of free apps or other programs that can get you doing relaxation and meditation. Even a counselor or a coach can help you say, well, where life is good, how do I build more resilience? What do I want to do while I have this phase of my life? When you're into the reacting, this is when you start to not feel quite yourself. It could be a time now or into the next section, injured, where you start to talk to your family doctor about just not feeling quite yourself. You can connect with EAP counseling. You can get to some self-help resources like the ones that are on the CallTime Mental Health site, and also AFC nationally at their afchelps.ca. They have some groups, discussion groups. It could be a good time to connect with something like that. There's web and phone apps. As it gets a little more serious, then that's when you could call into the crisis line at your EAP or MAP. You could use the Vancouver or BC or Canada-wide crisis line. It could be a chance to access your extended health benefits if you have other insurance that you can access, to be able to maybe go to a massage therapist, a naturopath, other people that may be able to help you. And then when you're really ill, then it's time to seek out the support of a psychologist. It may be related to addiction. It's time to start looking into treatment, medication management. Your union may also have disability management supports to both say, how can we support you before that's even needed, or to support you when that is needed. And so again, each of these stages is just ramping it up a little bit, depending on how you find yourself. And these are things you can think of also if you have people around you that you're looking to support. Because it's appropriate to reach out at absolutely any stage, right? Why wait till life is in a crisis, mental health is in a crisis? Just like why wait when you're not quite feeling well physically, right? If you're feeling off, it's a good time to get a blood test or to check with your doctor to do a physical. If you notice just some symptoms that are not normal. It's the same in our mental health and our stress and strain. If you find yourself getting short or being down or not getting out of bed or whatever it might be, it's time to reach out for support to somebody in your peer group. It could be a benefit through your plan. It could be to a crisis line. In Vancouver and BC, there's the 211 community service line that can help connect you to community services. Could be an HR department if you're connected to a traditional employer. It could be reaching out to your union steward or somebody there to be able to find out what supports are available, or just to find out if that you're not alone in the strains that you may be going through. I add this slide not to make simple what it is to go through mental health challenges and to get supports for them, but the hope is that whatever challenges come our way in our life, that we can actually overcome them and move forward in life. And I think we all will probably have examples. If we think back through our lifetime, we probably hit crisis points, maybe of things in our family of origin growing up. It may have been things that happened in our school age years or in university. It may have happened in young adulthood or through our adulthood that we had kind of traumatic events that happened. It could have been the death of a family member. It could have been dropping out of school. It could have been any manner of things that happened in our life that at the time felt devastating and threw us in a loop and may have affected our mental health. And so you'll see in this graph, in terms of how we're doing, performance meaning just how we're doing, mental health, energy, capacity to handle life, and then over time. And so, we have the status quo of life, and then something like that can hit us. Or it could be the latest strikes, or it could have been back during the pandemic, where, we kind of are resisting that this is going to have an impact on us, but it has an impact, and it throws us into some chaos. And so that's when we're not sure what's happening. We're not sure what the solutions, how long is it going to last? And so at some point, we come to a transforming idea that just says, okay, I'm going to have to get a hold of this situation and start to take steps to manage it the best way I can. The worst period of time is in the period of time where you feel like you have no control. Now, the truth may be we may not be able to control our outside forces, things that are happening in our environment, like a US-based strike. But there are things that we can do to say, what resources can I access? How do I budget to be able to make it through this time? What supports might be available to me that I can find out and access? What support groups can I go to so I'm not so alone? So the transforming idea is that I'm not powerless. There are choices and actions that I can take for my own well-being and the well-being of those people around us. And that as we gain those resources and as the challenge period ends, that we can actually end up at a higher new level status quo where we've built new resilience, new capacity, and new resources. And so quite often people, even with mental health challenges, will say later that they learned skills that they took with them forward into their life to get through a crisis point, but that actually provided them with a better ability than they had earlier to be able to manage life's challenges as they go along. And so as we think about this, a lot of people ask, well, this is for me, but it's also for people that I see around me. And so, how might I be able to support others that are around me? And so this is a few steps, a few guidelines on how you can support somebody that's around you, in particular colleagues in the sector. The first is for lending a helping hand is, if you notice, first, even before the steps I've listed here, is just notice, right? We talked about the iceberg. What above the water symptoms are you seeing in people around you? When earlier in my life, I had my own mental health challenges, challenges with addiction. I was trying to cope with them by myself, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And I hit a critical point in my life where I wasn't doing well. And it was actually a work colleague who finally took a moment out of their day and said, hey, you really don't seem like yourself today. I'm wondering what's going on. And they hit me just at that right moment where I realized I didn't have it together. I didn't have the answers and I needed help, but maybe wasn't even quite at the point where I was ready to actually ask for that help. But because they made that statement, a safe, friendly statement that just says, hey, a non-judgmental statement that said, hey, you don't seem like yourself. How are you doing? That it was just the door I needed open to be able to share with them. what I was struggling with. And that friend ended up looking into some resources and providing them to me, and then supporting me and reaching out myself to those resources. And that was the first step towards my recovery and my healing. And so you can be that kind of resource for other people in your life. And so if you notice that, it can be making that comment. One of these steps here says, ask if your colleague's willing to chat with you and make an appointment. It just means find a safe moment when that can happen. Or if you're noticing they're not well, but you don't want to say it in front of other people, or it's not appropriate where you are, it just means, hey, can we chat a little bit later, or setting a time to talk to them. When you know, you can control the environment and make sure that they're in a peaceful or a safe environment, a private environment where they can say something if there is something going on. And focus the discussion on what you've noticed and share your concern. Remember, this isn't time to judge or to guess what might be going on, as much as we may want to. What people really need, what we all need, is somebody to care and then listen. And so just being able to ask that opening question to say, hey, here's what I've seen. So it's not a judgment, it's not an assumption, it's just what you physically, emotionally, verbally seen from them the last while. And just sticking to those facts so that they can then respond to them. And when they do respond, just listen without judgment and stay curious. And curious can just say, well, tell me more about that, or when did that start? Or has this happened to you before? And what did you do that time? So it can just be those curious. You don't have to be a trained counselor to be a friend. And a friend just stays curious, open, and asks some interested questions as they share where they're at. Also, don't shut down and panic if they start to say what's happening. Your job isn't to become the counselor, to be the answer, to solve all their problems. Your job is to be a conduit and a connection to help when they may not have been ready to quite reach out yet. And so that's why you can ask them what they need and how you can help, and letting them know that you can respect confidentiality, and that you can kind of help guide them to some resources if they're not quite in a state to find those resources for themselves. And then finally, you can suggest accessing resources and support, and share a couple of resources. And so that's why we tell people to try and have the CallTime mental health information handy. It's always great to have a crisis line available, or information about those, or just know where to go and get that information. And you could even ask the person, you may know about CallTime Mental Health, the union has these resources. Are you up to looking those up, or could you use my help finding a couple things? And then you can bring those back to them. It's best, of course, if they reach out for those resources themselves, but actually finding the number or the link can be a helpful step to get somebody to connect to that help. The thing to remember is not to overwhelm yourself either in this process. When you're looking to help somebody, one of the models that I like to talk about is the difference between being responsible to somebody and being responsible for somebody. When we feel responsible for them, when we take that on, suddenly, because I've learned something, now I feel like it's on me. Well, when it's on us, then we suddenly feel totally responsible for it, and we try to control, right? Because now the outcome is on us. And so we tend to be directive, we're not curious, we assume things, we get frustrated when people don't do what we want, because people you may offer this help to may not be ready. And so you have to be ready for that. And so if you can instead think about, I'm responsible to people, that can include your kids, can include your family, and it can include colleagues, that I'm just responsible to them as a good friend, as a colleague, to be able to notice things, to be able to say, hey, you're not this, don't seem like yourself. I'm here to help you. Do you want some help getting resources? That's being responsible to them, but they're responsible for themselves. And so it takes a weight off of us so that we can have this kind of conversation. And if they start sharing, well, I've never told anybody this before, but I have a raging addiction that I've been hiding from everybody. You don't have to panic and say, I don't know how to help this person, because you are capable of finding out what their union benefit might be, or look up addiction resources online or through CallTime Mental Health, because there is a mental health and addiction line in BC that you can actually call to get that kind of support and direction on where to get help. So you can stay curious and helpful without it having to be on you. So just be prepared. When you ask somebody, they may have a lot going on. And if you open up that question, they may tell you about it, but that you don't have to own the whole thing. It's about getting them connected to the next step and being a support. Now they have one less person to keep a secret from. And even though they may have other things going on, you could just check in and say, how did that go? Or what happened when you phoned? And that can be a great support to somebody who's finally reaching out for help that they might not have reached out for before. So just remember, just ask, then listen, and then as suitable and as needed, you can provide the help. And just as we kind of conclude some of the models, I just thought I'd show this broader picture model for the whole workplace, because I know there's going to be a mix of people watching this webinar, both people who kind of are frontline working on set and in entertainment and different functions, and also supervisors and managers and people in production management as well. And so this is my multi-tiered workplace mental health model. And I like to frame what mental health can look like in a healthy workplace and a well-supported workplace. At the bottom of all of this is leadership, support, and workplace culture. So in other words, in an ideal situation, everybody's on the same page that mental health is important, that people are important, and keeping them well at work. So just like leadership is often very aware of health and safety, which has typically been physical health and safety and not having accidents and injuries. Well, on the same plane, it's about what is the workplace like and what is people's experience from a mental health and stress and strain position. And so leaders, whatever your leadership position, if over your unit, over your department, over your production, can be mindful to say, people look to me to set the temperature or the tone for, is it safe to talk about mental health in our workplace? Because if nobody ever says those words from leadership, nobody else is saying those words either. So how do we be authentic about ourselves? And imagine if a leader in a workplace could say, hey, everybody, we've got this project. We know we're going to work long hours. We know it's going to get crazy, but I want you to know that after my last production, I reached out to our EAP, and it was a great support to me because I carry the stress just like all of you do in our own ways on these productions. And I needed a tune-up in terms of how I was handling it, or whatever it might be, but just some kind of acknowledgement about it. Whether or not about themselves, at least that acknowledging that those supports are important. The second part is psychological health and safety, which is about doing no harm. There is actually a whole Canadian health and safety, psychological health and safety standard that's been met with 13 factors that you can look up. But it just means, what are people's roles and who are they interacting with? Is it the public, right? And so when you're disrupting traffic, if you're disrupting a location and you're the one face-to-face with the public, what are the mental health risks of people being yelled at or assailed by the public in that position, or whatever it might be in the context of your particular work? But do we have safety standards that just say people are going to get checked in on when they're under particular strain? Then there's mental health first aid, recognizing mental health issues and strain, knowing how to provide support. And so that's where people can get training. Leaders and other colleagues can get training in mental health or psychological first aid. Act Safe, of course, is a big promoter of workplace mental health as well as health and safety, and they have resources. And also ACF also is providing the mental health first aid programming, and their website is, again, acfhelps.ca. And we have links, of course, also on the calltimementalhealth.com website. So you can get training beyond today and beyond the modules on the CallTime, but those are great places to start, those modules on the CallTime website. And then you can also take this longer 2-day training. Above that is then proactive training in mental health and wellness, and that may come through your union. It's definitely available if you're a union member through your employee assistance, member assistance program. They have websites with lots of videos and material. It's the CallTime Mental Health campaign that provides training about coping and wellness. So it's stigma reducing content that says it's okay to talk about these things. And also, those are the things on not just how to deal with mental health strain, but also wellness. How do I actually stay well? And then finally is acute care support. So you've got leadership and environment, you can talk about it. You're watching people's mental health from a safety standard. You've got people who have got some additional training that are around your environment that can watch out and know how to help even better. We've got people kind of accessing stuff to build their resilience and their understanding of their own well-being. But then there's going to be a level where some people are going to need acute care support. And that means crisis support. It means seeing a psychologist or a mental health practitioner, a counselor. It may mean if there's an accident or an injury on set or in your workplace that an EAP or an MAP is called, or WorkSafe is called, to be able to provide an on-site support from a counselor or a critical incident responder to be able to help people cope with what's just happened in the workplace. Or it may be an addiction assessment and potentially treatment. So there's going to be times when any of us might need that acute care support, and it is available to you in the community. There's also the Canadian Mental Health Association and some of their programs that help support people with anxiety and depression and many others. And you can find some of those links on the CallTime Mental Health website and elsewhere as well. So when we think about holistic mental health, we can think about this whole kind of organism, all of these layers. Counseling is one piece, which I encourage more and more people to do. There's no need to struggle with life's strains by yourself. And if you're not into counseling, then maybe go for coaching. How do I manage a life of surge of work and downtimes? How do I start to make alternate plans for myself if I want to advance my career? These are all things that help us cope well. And then if you're not well, then talking to your doctor, accessing mental health supports through the province or through your benefits or through other social service agencies in your community. And if you're just plain in a crisis and don't know where to start, then call a crisis line to talk it through and get some referrals and advice on where else you can reach out. So hopefully that's given you the broader picture as well as we've gone through these models. And so just looking at the time and the slide, we've come up to the end of kind of the model presentation, and I hope that's given us enough content to be able to have a bit of a conversation and some Q&A about the CallTime campaign, of course, which we wanted you to learn more about so that you can now and into the future access it as a resource. Don't forget to check out our podcast and to go to your favorite platform to sign up for it and to become a CallTime champion on the website so that you can help us promote the content that we're delivering on a regular basis. And so those are all things that you can help us with. And we've got Christina, and welcome back, Dagan, as well. And happy to field any questions. While I was presenting, I wasn't able to read along with any of the chat or questions. So I'm happy for us to just take that time now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Greg and Christina. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm really excited myself. Even knowing the presentation and what content was coming, I still gleaned lots and took some really excellent notes. So thank you for that. I've been keeping an eye on the Q&A and the comments, so I'll share one or two that I have now. First one up is feeling sad without knowing why specific to grief?
That's an excellent question. I would say many times, yes, that sadness typically comes from an area of life that hasn't met our expectation, or something that we've lost. And so I would say typically it's like a light form of grief that may be from something that specifically you can identify as having lost recently, or sometimes it can be something subtle that I've gotten better over the years, but back when I was talking about my kind of early recovery and mental health recovery days, I realized after a while that my emotional reaction time was like 5 days. Right? I would have something happen in my life, and then 5 days later, I'd be crying or super upset or really down, and I'd have to like retrace my previous few days, um, and then find out, oh yeah, that thing happened a few days ago. So I had quite a delay. So sometimes we have a delay to things and we don't identify them. And sometimes they were just a subtle thing. Maybe a job ended or a project ended, and we're thinking that happens all the time. But I might be sad because I lost those connections that I had on a day-to-day basis. You know, I can feel that after being on a 4-day kind of retreat or adventure or family holiday, and afterwards, you know, just feel down the next day, just because I don't have the same intensity of, well, relaxation and fun, but also that interpersonal connection that I have if I go home to my apartment alone or whatever it might be. So that's a good question. It's worth monitoring. You know, sometimes we can take a moment instead of looking outside of ourselves. That's where I really believe in a practice of meditation that doesn't have to be complicated. You know, meditation can
I
be
think too, Greg. Oh, sorry.
hard.
I was going to say, I think too, Greg,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's probably good to hear that it's quite normal to experience a delay when we're so busy with our lives and then it pops up. It's you shouldn't feel anyone who's experiencing a delay shouldn't feel it's abnormal. It's I think it's quite normal with how busy our lives are these days.
And you know, some good old self-compassion that you know, we're emotional beings, we're complex. Our brain is an amazing supercomputer. Forget AI and ChatGPT. Our brain is still the top of the chain of information processing. And so we can have a lot going on that we may not be attuned into in the moment. And so if you're feeling down and sad, you know, being able to take a moment to be kind to yourself, do something that's self-care related, you know, massage appointment, a hot bath, a moment to yourself, maybe turning down a commitment just to have a little bit of time, or maybe alternatively, instead of being alone, saying, maybe I need something to lift me up. And so maybe I need to call that good friend or go to a movie or do something with somebody so that it doesn't, you know, sink down without an understanding of where it's coming from.
Great. Thank you very much. That also, the question also reminded me of the blog post that was just recently reshared of yours or of CallTime Mental Health on, am I just sad or is it depression?
Right.
I found that to be a really valuable read, just in not necessarily on the topic of grief specifically, but just the question of like, is this something acute or is it just a moment of sadness?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you can find that easily by searching the posts and going to under the menu on the website.
So the next question I have here is, what is the best way to stay optimistic about daily life and the future when large crises keep happening?
Right. It is the focus game and the attention game. Mm-hmm. Right. So the most powerful moment we have is the present moment and present moment awareness. If you're anything like me and the people I support, you know, we put our attention and our energy on the thing that's yelling the loudest. And so it's not to diminish the fact that we can have crises happen, but quite often we're not only dealing with the thing that we can control, kind of like in my presentation I was talking about, with what's happened, what can I actually do, right? Quite often we get overwhelmed, our emotions swell, we feel somewhat helpless, and then we hit overwhelm and we shut down. But that actually can accumulate to feeling worse. So the ultimate question, the moment of awareness says, okay, what can I do in this moment? And whether or not I can change the crisis event or the outside influences, I can say, what can I do now for myself or for others or in the world, right? So if a world crisis happens or an economic crisis happens or an environmental crisis happens, I can't control the environment, but I can say, what can I take action on? You know, for everything from what can I recycle to what's the local environmental campaign I can join in my municipality, in my neighborhood, in my country, because that gives us a sense of empowerment. And that's how we make it through a crisis, is when we come to the question of, what can I do now? The second thing is to be able to spend time thinking about the future, our desired future outcome. It can be hard to do right at the beginning of a crisis, or if a job ends or something happens, because it's kind of cut off what we were anticipating. But if we can start to generate, okay, if I were to regroup, what would I want that to look like now? And spend some time every day actually thinking about it and generating the feelings of having it. Because what we tend to do is we tend to look backwards and live our lives out of the past, right? And so if I have something hard happen, you know, it may send me into a mood, because it's been an acute moment. You know, if I start to ruminate on that event and what's happened in the past for a few days or weeks, right, it moves from a mood into something more severe, right? And then if I think about it for years, and people say, what's wrong? And they say, well, 3 years ago, this thing happened to me. Now it's almost become part of my personality. And so I want to think about what's influencing my experience of today. Is it by focusing on events I can't control from the past, or is it focused more on the hope and the activities that I can choose to work my way towards? I don't want to be simplistic because it's a general question. It's not about not having hard emotions from repeated change. But I think what I've found is the people who are the most discouraged and have the biggest challenge are the people who lose sight of any control or ability to take action. And so if you can just get back to say, today, what can I do today for myself? And it may not resolve the crisis, but it can say, what can I do for my wellness? What can I do to help somebody who is also involved in this crisis? What can I do to prevent this from happening again? Or from the reality of my circumstance, what can I do to create a better outcome for myself down the road, tomorrow and down the road? Because then we can start to focus on the emotions of that future instead of on the events that have happened in the past.
I think too, when I think of all the things that are going on in the world and how heavy some of that can be, that and it's hard not to be affected by technology, but I've spoken to a number of friends who find it really empowering and healthy to, as soon as you wake up, not to look at your phone, like do other things like self-care things, whether it's a walk or the nice cup of tea, looking out your window at what nature has to offer, so that too can sort of separate you from that huge amount of turmoil that's out there.
Totally. And one of the ways, I mean, it's commonly said but seldomly done, is morning and evening gratitudes. Morning gratitudes, bigger ones about your life, and then evening gratitudes for anything from the day. It could be a smile from a person who walked past you. It could have been any small thing from your day that you have gratitude. And again, it's all about perspective, and that people's mental health is better when they have a better perspective and aren't lost in some of the more challenging elements of life. Not to ignore the challenges, but to balance it out with another perspective.
Terrific recommendations. Thank you both. Our next question. It's difficult not to internalize when your bosses or coworkers are abusive and unconcerned about your feelings. How do you deal with this in a healthy way?
I was waiting for you, Christina, to take
Well, depending on who your employer is and who you have around you, sharing this with a colleague or someone further up the food chain, there's also different ways to abuse, and there's resources for that. But first of all, that's unacceptable, and you shouldn't have to experience that at all. We all want to feel safe and healthy in our work environments. So I would be seeking someone further up the food chain, for lack of a better term, to discuss it with, and perhaps discussing it first with a colleague to see if there's any support, or if they are also experiencing that, and then it's a different animal, so to speak. Maybe that's the style of the individual to be abusive, and then when there's more than one person that are having the same experience from the same individual or individuals, then it's definitely something that the employer needs to look into and adjust. Anything else to add,
Yeah.
Greg?
No, thank you for that. Sorry to throw that your way, but definitely, I mean, it's a difficult circumstance when you don't get support right within the workplace. So not knowing your situation, one question is, have we articulated this to them? And that may be part of the issue. You don't feel safe to do so. If there is any way to feel safe enough to say, hey, here's how my work is affecting me, or, there's been a lot of tension or strain, and so this is how I see it affecting me and my colleagues. Can we talk about it? Sometimes we assume that people should get it and see it, but sometimes just people are in their own bubble and world, even supervisors, managers, that actually they're missing the cues. So not saying that you haven't done that, but that's one step. Not to forget, have I articulated what's happening as best I can, and then not had the results that I wanted from that. It can be good to get outside help and resource from counselor, advisor, so that you can have some perspective on it and get some outside support if you're not getting it from where you need to. We do have a blog post on the site also about what bullying and harassment is. And so that's when a complaint could be made if it's not just passive, but it's also become active in terms of bullying, harassment statements or activities or actions on their part towards you, then it is worth reporting and or finding out. And so I'm not sure about what information ActSafe may have about that element. I know WorkSafe BC, of course, has information about bullying and harassment and the procedures to do that. And also, if you are in a union, then being able to reach out to your union steward for their advice as well.
I see someone, an attendee wrote documented, and that is a very important step in that process as well. And documenting the time of day, where you were on the job site, who else was around, what was said or done. That's a valuable comment. Thank you for that, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I see that comment that, people can feel like they're not as supported depending on who's covered by what plan or what group or what representation, and that can be difficult, and as I support your sector, but I'm not directly in your sector. But I think I've heard people from the CallTime campaign and even some of the kind of wise sage elders from the field that say you have to decide if the work that you're doing works for you, including working in a job or on a particular project or in a particular role or in a particular sector. That's not to say that's all right and just, but if a system works such that it doesn't support your mental health or it's damaging to your mental health, if there isn't a viable or an immediate way to see how to make that shift, or you find it repeatedly, then another question is, how do I be kind to myself and consider what my options? And maybe it means looking at a different role or working in a different sector or area or using different elements of my skills. And that can be heard the wrong way, that I'm saying you just ignore a sector or elements of a sector that aren't good. No, that means you can say, what can I do? Like I said, what choices do I have? But also I say, take care of yourself. And if something is damaging to you, it can be okay to come to an acknowledgement that that's the truth, that you've seen it repeatedly in a particular type of role, and that maybe that fit isn't the best for you in terms of maintaining your well-being. So I hope that's taken the right way, because it's not a problem with you. It's just to say, for my makeup and my work. I know personally for myself, people say, wow, you're so strong, you do work with counseling and you hear people's problems. Well, for my nature, I can do that. But there's other kinds of jobs I could not do, just because of my makeup and nature. And if I had people, directly, working with the public that are upset on a regular basis, that wouldn't suit my nature, and that would wind me down over a while. So it would also be about me saying, is the nature of my work suitable to my personality and how I work? So of course, I'm working with the sector to support all those levels in that workplace mental health model to make the sector the best it can be. A lot of great progress has been made, and there's still challenges, I think, of working in a high pressure, high deadline and oriented sector like yourselves.
Thank you both. Just in response to your comment, Greg, too, about ActSafe, we do have a self-guided online course on the topic of bullying and harassment, which I encourage everyone to check out. I believe its estimated running time is about 2 hours, so it's not an extremely lengthy course, but I hope that it would give some additional insights and support for people that are in those kinds of situations. We don't, this is not necessarily a question, although it's a comment that I think is maybe worth highlighting, or two comments rather, but I'll stitch together for the purpose of our conversation. I have always been the go-to person with problems. It can be tough, especially when there hasn't been the info and help or not having the knowledge of how to properly guide people. I Google everything all the time. If I'm unsure about something or how to help someone, I go to Google to find options. So it's just, I just felt like that wasn't necessarily a question, but it's probably not an uncommon circumstance for people that just feel genuinely inclined to try to help others to find themselves in. And it kind of resonated with your comment about recognizing the difference from responsible for and responsible to. And so I felt like that was worth throwing out into the floor in case there were any comments or suggestions you wanted to make in response to that individual and others that find themselves in similar kind of roles.
Yeah, I mean, it's the great thing and the great gift is that people feel safe with you, right? And that people are willing to open up to you. So it really is a gift that you have. But we also have to know how much we can afford to give away that gift on a regular basis before we replenish ourselves. So the first thing is around your own self-care and that concept of responsible to and responsible for. So it may not be how many times people ask for support, but how much you're owning of each time they ask you for that support and each person's story and journey. And trust me, I know as a counselor as well, I have professional training and boundaries, and yet I can still carry that weight with myself as well. So it's great that you're Googling and all. Google may or may not be, it doesn't sort what it gives you. It just gives you whatever has the highest kind of rating in its programming. And so, if you can use resources that are linked off of CallTime Mental Health, afchelps.ca, these resources where we've vetted information for you, then that can be a good place to start. May not be everything you need on every topic, but it could be a place where at least we've looked into the resource to see if it's legit and has good content. And so that might be something to think about, or in between times, maybe finding a few websites. BC has a website called Here to Help. I forget the .org perhaps, but Here to Help, and I think Dagan's looking it up, and that can be a good resource. And we also have 211, the community service information line that is both a website, bc211.ca, and 211 is an information line, and that can be really helpful as well. So maybe find yourself some good standard ways to look. So because Google can be overwhelming, and if you're taking time curating that information, that can also be an extra tax on you. So preloading or pre-finding some worthwhile sources that you can use yourself or you can refer people to might be a really helpful way to go, so that you're doing less work on that front. And the other is, if this is coming natural, that people come to you and you feel like you do want to be of help, I would recommend taking one of the courses, either a community college course, could be another online course. It could be through afchelps.ca, where they're at times offering the mental health first aid course, and other groups offer that training as well. Maybe you could get a couple-day training that will help you better know how to talk to people, get the skills, know what to do if somebody's mentions harming themselves or the thoughts of suicide that can happen for people. Again, lots of people have those thoughts, and but it can be scary when you hear those words. And so, learning ways to manage those conversations so that you have a few more tools in your toolkit for knowing what to do. So those are some of my ideas.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I can say I empathize and I relate to that person's comments and my own experience being on set and kind of being that person that people seem comfortable enough to approach and be vulnerable with. And having taken mental health first aid from AFC, it was a fantastic training in reminding me to incorporate self-care as part of my process in supporting others and reminding myself of maintaining those healthy boundaries that allows me to be as supportive as possible to the individual.
Right.
So I agree completely with your recommendation there.
Yeah, great.
I think it's a lot like you know, when we are on our flight and the stewards and stewardesses are explaining about the mask, and they always say, put on your own mask first before you help, you know, your child or your partner. And with self-care, if we can't take care of ourselves, we won't have the energy or the ability to help others. So it's really an important element.
Agreed. I have another question for us. What suggestions might you have to help my coworkers who are having a hard time in our toxic workplace?
Okay, good point. Again, some of the similar things that we've said together. First of all, is to find out if it's that widespread, then it means there's a problem and or a problem person that in that environment. And so I would say have you first of all investigated all the ways to address that concern with people who should be informed, and whether that's through Act Safe or Work BC, if it's through your union, if it's through the employer or production company that's involved in that project. It should be reported if there's active bullying and harassment happening. It's one of those things that if somebody doesn't say something, it's going to continue on down the road. Now, assuming that you can do that, or maybe you can't, or you've done it already and there hasn't been help yet, then being able to provide mutual support is one way. I always recommend, if people can get a counselor to help them individually, that could be useful. And also, if you could get a coach or a counselor that might be willing to meet with a group of people to talk about coping mechanisms, to help identify what the strain is, what the challenges in that workplace and coping mechanisms, right? Because if the situation is that there's that negative influence in that space, and collectively you're choosing to stay in that space to continue working, which can be valid if that's your livelihood, etc., then being able to know together how to be a mutual support, and how to identify the injuries that are being inflicted and the methods of those people, and maybe finding tools on how to respond, how to reply, how to set boundaries, how to protect yourself, and how to create self-care opportunities for yourself and your colleagues. So number one is follow every path you can to report what's happening to the appropriate people that might be able to have an influence or make change. And then take responsibility for your well-being and your team's well-being by accessing help in the form of a counselor, an advisor that can provide you all with tools and abilities. And I know online there's a variety of courses. I don't have particular courses or websites in mind, but there are courses on dealing with bullies in the workplace. And so you can find those by searching for them and seeing what, and maybe you could even take a course together on how to cope with, bullying in the workplace.
There are, and unfortunately I can't recall exactly which one it is, but there's a bystander intervention training, which gives you points on when you see somebody that is being bullied or harassed, and different techniques to navigate through that and make it stop, as well as keeping yourself safe, as well as the other individuals. So those would be some great things to check out as well.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I see one participant is Acknowledged Good Night Out Vancouver, which is one organization that I know provides bystander intervention training. Their their kind of focus, I think, is for the service industry, but they also have a little bit of overlap with us because they support like music venues and performing arts and live events venues. So they do definitely seek to support people from our industry as well. And there's obviously other organizations that do it too. I've taken that training as well. All right, well, we're at 3:25. That covers the questions that we have. So we only have a moment to spare. If there's anyone else listening who has another question that they'd like to throw into the Q&A, we may have time to cover it. But other than that, perhaps if there's any final thoughts that Greg or Christina, that either of you care to share before we wrap up, the floor is yours.
I think just be aware of yourself and your self-care. Try and be aware of your coworkers and family and friends. If something seems different from the person that you've been working alongside for 10 years, it's probably because something is different, and find a way to connect and see if you can help. We have to look out for one another. It's the only way I think we're going to get through some of these patterns and issues we personally have, as well as patterns and issues in our work environment and in the world right now, unfortunately. So just be kind and be aware and try and connect. Even as simple as walking into the workplace and just saying good morning. It doesn't always have to be a heavy conversation to connect and make that person feel okay in that moment or for the day.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. And I would just say, remember that there are resources out there for yourself. There's places you can go, supports you can access, and there's resources available to help others as well. And so don't forget to use the tools that we've talked about and the websites and the campaigns so that you will help direct you to the right kinds of resources for your situation and those of others.
Excellent. Well, we haven't had any more questions come in, so I'll treat that as closing remarks. Thank you both so much. It's been wonderful to have you. ACSAFE are incredible fans of the organization and of the work that you do, and we're really excited to continue supporting each other and collaborating on various fronts. I'll just acknowledge to everyone that anyone who's registered will receive a link to the recorded webinar. You'll also receive a link to complete an evaluation on the webinar if you feel inclined to share any feedback about what you liked about it or what you had hoped to have covered, which maybe wasn't spoken to. We'll also be having our next webinar coming up in the near future on preventing slips, trips, and falls. This webinar, the recording, will also be made available on our website for everyone to be able to share with other members of the community that maybe didn't know about it, but that you think would find a lot of value in that. Yeah, so I guess that concludes our webinar. Thank you again for everything that you've shared today, both of you. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be part of something like this.
Great.
Cheers.
Great. All right, and to everyone who's been listening, thank you so much for registering and for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.